Good morning, afternoon, evening. Everyone, thank you for being here today. We are gathered to explore a fascinating journey, one that has revolutionized the way humans communicate. The history of the telephone. It's difficult to imagine a world without instant communication, where messages traveled only as fast as the physical means by which they were carried. But just a little over a century and a half ago, the concept of speaking to someone miles away in real time was nothing short of a dream. Our story begins in the early 19th century, in a world where communication over long distances was extremely slow. Letters took days, weeks, or even months to reach their destination, depending on the distance. This was the backdrop against which inventors began to imagine a way to transmit sound over wires, inspired by the success of the telegraph, which allowed for the transmission of coded messages via electrical signals. The telegraph was indeed a revolutionary invention, patented by Samuel Morse in 1837, and it became the foundation for much of what was to follow. However, the telegraph had its limitations. It could only send one message at a time, and that too in the form of Morse code, which required special training to understand. The idea of transmitting actual voice conversations over wires was still a challenge, but this was the next logical step, one that many inventors around the world were striving to achieve. One of these inventors was a man named Alexander Graham Bell. Born in Scotland in 1847, Bell was a teacher for the deaf, a career that gave him a deep understanding of sound and the mechanics of the human voice. His work with the deaf, combined with his passion for invention, set him on the path to explore ways to improve communication technology. Bell's initial experiments were focused on improving the telegraph, specifically looking into the idea of sending multiple messages over the same wire simultaneously. During these experiments, he began to explore the concept of transmitting the human voice. He was joined in his efforts by Thomas Watson, a skilled electrician and mechanic. The two men worked tirelessly, experimenting with different types of diaphragms, coils, and electromagnetic devices to capture and transmit sound. Finally, on March 10th, 1876, after many months of trial and error, success arrived. Using a liquid transmitter that converted sound into electrical signals, Bell was able to send the first intelligible message to Watson, who was in another room. The famous words, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you," marked the birth of the telephone as we know it. Bell's invention was a breakthrough, but it wasn't the end of the story. In fact, there's considerable debate over who really invented the telephone. Several inventors, including Elisha Gray, were working on similar technologies at the same time. Gray, for instance, filed a patent for a similar device on the very same day as Bell. However, due to the speed at which Bell's patent was processed, he is credited with the invention. This has led to long-standing controversies and even legal battles over who should be recognized as the true inventor of the telephone. Nevertheless, Bell was the one who managed to develop, patent, and commercialize the telephone, transforming it from a laboratory experiment into a practical tool. In 1877, Bell and his supporters established the Bell Telephone Company, which began to build the first telephone networks in the United States. This was the beginning of a rapid expansion that would change the world forever. The early telephones were rudimentary by today's standards. They required a direct line between two phones, meaning each pair of telephones needed its own dedicated wire. This was cumbersome and limited the potential of the technology. However, with the development of the switchboard in the 1880s, it became possible to connect multiple phones through a central exchange, greatly expanding the reach and utility of the telephone. The invention spread quickly across the United States and soon to other parts of the world. By the turn of the 20th century, telephone networks were becoming commonplace in cities and towns, connecting homes, businesses, and governments in ways that were previously unimaginable. The impact of the telephone on society was profound. It transformed business practices, made communication more personal and immediate, and began to shrink the world, making distances seem shorter and connections closer. As the technology improved, so did the design and functionality of telephones. The crank phones of the early days gave way to rotary dial telephones, and eventually to the push-button phones of the mid-20th century. With each innovation, the telephone became more user-friendly and accessible to the general public. The latter half of the 20th century saw the development of long-distance and international calling, thanks to the introduction of microwave transmission and undersea cables. For the first time, people could speak directly with others on the opposite side of the globe. This was an era of rapid globalization, and the telephone was at the heart of it. The arrival of mobile phones in the late 20th century marked another revolution in the history of the telephone. No longer were people tied to their homes or offices to make or receive calls. The first mobile phones were large, expensive, and had limited battery life, but they represented the future of communication, one that was mobile, personal, and increasingly convenient. Over the past few decades, we have seen the mobile phone evolve into the smartphone, a device that does far more than just make calls. Today's smartphones are powerful computers that fit in our pockets, capable of accessing the internet, sending messages, taking photos, and running a wide variety of applications. The telephone has come a long way from Bell's initial invention, and its impact on society is immeasurable. But it's important to remember that the telephone, in all its forms, is fundamentally about connection. It has always been about bridging distances, bringing people closer together, and making the world a smaller, more connected place. The history of the telephone is a testament to human ingenuity and our innate desire to communicate. As we look to the future, the telephone will undoubtedly continue to evolve, integrating more with other technologies like artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. We may soon see even more sophisticated ways of communication that we can hardly imagine today. But at its core, the telephone will remain what it has always been, a tool to connect people. Thank you for your attention. I hope this journey through the history of the telephone has given you a greater appreciation for this incredible invention and the impact it has had on our lives. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share.